Welcome, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to this fourth installment of the Career Accelerator Lecture Series, sponsored by the Engineering Advisory Board for KU. We're pleased to have Craig Martin with us today and all of you with us today. This has been a great experience, having all these highly experienced, accomplished professionals share their experiences with us over this semester. It's made our fall COVID semester a little brighter, and we appreciate them and what they've done. A little bit about how this works if you haven't been with. So Craig's going to go for probably, I don't know exactly, but say 45, 50 minutes, most of an hour, sharing with us on leadership and safety today. And when he's complete, or while that's all going on, you are welcome to use the chat function. You're encouraged to use the chat function and share your questions that you have for Craig. And I'll be compiling all of those during the hour, and then at the end, we'll go through a list of questions and have a question time, and that's always one of the most enjoyable parts of this experience. So encourage you to submit your questions. Your questions will be anonymous unless you want to share your name, and you're welcome to do that. So I'm the only one who will see your chats as we go, and so the general population will not see your chats, but you're welcome to share your questions, and again, encouraged to do so. Let's see, so that's how it works. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our speaker. Mr. Craig Martin has over 50 years of experience in the international engineering and construction industry. In December 2014, he retired as president and CEO of Jacobs Engineering Group Incorporated, a provider of technical, professional, and construction services. Craig became president of Jacobs in 2002 and CEO in 2006. He also served as a member of Jacobs' board of directors from 2002 until his retirement. Before his promotion to president, he served in several positions, including as Jacobs' executive vice president of global sales and marketing. He received his bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Kansas and his MBA from the University of Denver. He is currently a director of team industrial services and serves on the compensation committee and HSE committees of the company. Craig is also chairman of the board of Yarlung Records, LLC. He previously served on the boards and compensation committees of CSRA until its sale to General Dynamics and Hill International. Craig was chairman of the board at Hill for the final 2 years of his service. Mr. Martin is also senior advisor to the National Center for Construction Safety. Craig is the National Association of Corporate Directors Leadership Fellow and a member of the National Academy of Construction. He received the Carol H. Dunn Award of Excellence from the Construction Industry Institute and the Distinguished Engineering Service Award from the University of Kansas. He is a very distinguished alumni that we are proud to have and are pleased that he is still interested and actively involved in helping make the university better and the school better. So with that, I'll turn it over to Craig and invite him to share with us what he has.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Nice to be with you all. I hope that I can put together some interesting things for you to think about as we go through the next hour or so. So let me get the program up on the screen. Is that coming through okay?
That is coming through.
All righty. So, I'm going to talk about 3 topics: leadership, ethics, and safety. But before I start in on the topic specifically, I want to have a safety minute. Something we did very commonly at Jacobs. We started every meeting with a brief discussion of safety so that it was always top of mind. And my safety minute today is going to be about this event. There was an uncontrolled in-flight engine failure on the Qantas A380, flight number QA32, I believe it was. And this is a while back, November 10th of 2010. There were 469 people on board the airplane, 440 passengers and 29 crew. When the engine exploded over Indonesia. The explosion not only destroyed the engine, it destroyed several other parts of the aircraft, too much to go into real detail, but it was only through extraordinary efforts on the pilots and crew part, on the folks on the ground at Changi in Singapore, that this aircraft was able to be brought in and landed without any loss of life or even any severe injuries. Oop, that's not the thing I wanted to see. Okay, hang on a minute. There we go. Wrong button. So here's why. There was an oil line in the engine, and when the oil line was manufactured, there was a misaligned counterbore. You can see how it's just slightly offset that, and that made the wall of this oil pipe thinner than it was designed to be. And the thin wall section couldn't stand the pressure. It cracked, it sprayed oil into the turbine, and that resulted in this uncontained explosion. Now, again, fortunately, no loss of life, no serious injuries, but obviously it bared significant investigation. And here's what the findings were. And the headline there is just as you see, economic pressures encouraged looking the other way. A380 was a big bet by Airbus. The engine supplier, Rolls-Royce, was really struggling, weak performance, poor margins. But this wall thickness nonconformance was known by the Rolls-Royce people on the manufacturing floor, but they didn't tell anybody higher up. Their experience had taught them that managers would do nothing even if they were notified. Notwithstanding that, the Rolls-Royce engineers discovered the nonconformance, but they approved it retroactively through a faulty statistical analysis. And then contrary to policy, retroactive approvals are supposed to be notified to the Rolls-Royce leadership, but they weren't. And as a result, almost 469 deaths, but not, and good news. But it's interesting to think about how these kinds of breakdowns can occur in a climate where the leadership's not there, where ethical behavior isn't strongly supported, where policy and procedure isn't followed. And I think there are lessons in this for any of us, whether we're involved in business or outside of it, in terms of what we should and ought to be doing and thinking about our business and how we run it. So I want to talk about leadership first. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on leadership. The previous three speakers in this series have done a terrific job of talking about leadership, what it takes, what the qualities are. If you didn't get a chance to see those sessions, I know they're available on YouTube, and I would strongly encourage you to look at it. But I've always been struck by a definition I got from a friend of mine, Richard Dare, about what leadership is. And he boiled it down to three basic things. First, you build a vision. Second, you communicate, and communicate. You can't communicate too much. And then you clear the obstacles that might be in the way. Let me talk a little tiny bit about each one of those things. Build the vision. You know, vision's a word that a lot of people use, and it's kind of grandiose when people use it often, but it doesn't need to be. It can be a big picture kind of vision, you know, a vision for a company or an organization or a charity. That it can also be a vision for a project or even something smaller. It really is just making sure that we're clear on what's to be accomplished, what success would look like if we got it there, why should we care, and then building consensus around that. And if you can do those things, you can take that first step in leadership in establishing the vision. A lot of that has just to do with communicating, and that's clearly the next step in leadership. You know, we heard from Kyle about the do's and don'ts of effective communication. Rich Brown talked about the traits. Pat Owenbring talked about communication is the real key to being an effective team member. And let's face it, most things that you're going to do when you're going to lead, it's going to be leading a team. And it's important that you be that person who can communicate effectively, whether it's written or oral or in presentations, that you know the value of storytelling, for example, a very powerful way to help people see the vision that your team's creating, and build constantly an understanding of the why and the where and the when. This is going to be an interesting issue as we go forward because of the COVID-19 impacts. I don't know that communicating in the sense that we talked about this 4 or 5 years ago is going to be quite the same thing as communicating today. I can see times where we're going to be having only remote teams, where the team won't ever actually physically be in the same space. I can see situations where a team's made out of people who've never met and won't get the chance to meet face to face. I think that's bears some thinking about how you socialize remote teams, how you socialize groups that may only be together 1 day a week, 1 day a month, or not at all. So communications is critical. And then the job of the leader is to clear the obstacles, right? There's always going to be challenges to succeed in achieving anybody's vision. And the more you can do that, the more you can lead from the front and show the team how to get past, around, and over those obstacles, the better your leadership and the more successful the team will be. So I'm not going to spend any more time on leadership. Like I said, I think the guys that have been on this call before me have done a great job. But I thought this simple little 3-point view of leadership was worth passing on. Let me move on now to ethics. Critical to being a leader is to have integrity, to be ethical. And sometimes people seem to think that's a hard thing, that there's a lot of dilemma in ethics and integrity. I'm not sure I agree. But each person has to face their own view of that and what it might mean. I'm going to take each of these next few topics: bribery and corruption, procurement integrity, conflicts of interest, project ethics, and my also category. I'm going to talk just a little bit about those things and what we might be exposed to and what we might need to do about it. Let me start with bribery and corruption. This is the Corruption Perception Index, the CPI, that's built by Transparency International every year. This is the 2019 index. So it's, it'll be out of date shortly, but it's the most current version at the moment. And as you can see, the United States, for example, is not the most pure. The very light yellow colored countries are the highest ranked. Certainly not the worst. The dark red countries are the worst ranked. But you can see there's a significant amount of corruption across the globe. And in fact, if you look at the data, the top countries tend to be either European or New Zealand, Singapore, really good scores, 85, 86, 87. The bottom countries, you can see them there as well. What I find disappointing is that the United States in 2019 was 23rd, tied only with France in terms of corruption. And that's down from 2012 when we were 19. Our score today is 69. Our score then was 73. So we've never been near the top. And it's interesting that over my entire career, corruption index scores for the United States have gone down. There have been occasional years when it went up a bit or down a bit, but in general, the trend has been down for a very long time. And I think that says something about what you and we will be exposed to. It's not just the country kind of issues that are there, but it's also the public sector problems that we see. Lots of us are going to be exposed to potential corruption and going to need to know how to deal with it. And so I encourage you to think about what you would do if you were asked, for example, to pay a bribe, or what's called a facilitization payment, or something along that same line. Because bribery and corruption are rampant, and you will see it everywhere. An example that we faced when I was here in Jacobs was the so-called pay to play. A number of government agencies, branches, usually at the state or local level, would encourage a vendor to, like a Jacobs, to make a contribution to a campaign, to a bond issue, or to a special charity, in order to get recognition when it came time to compete for work. That blew up badly at the airport here a few years ago. The director of the airport lost his job. A couple of companies lost a lot of reputation just because of that kind of example. So it isn't that you have to be in a Somalia or a Venezuela to be exposed to the potential for bribery and corruption. It's right here in the United States as well. And it's something that as you mature in your careers, you will likely face. The next aspect of this I would like to talk about a little bit is the issue of the procurement integrity. Okay? Almost anybody who is involved in the private sector industry that competes for work will be involved in potential procurement integrity issues. And I'll give you a big example here. Boeing was competing, this has been about 2010, I guess, competing to build the next tanker for the US Air Force, based on a 767 model. They needed the work. The aircraft was to replace an aircraft that Boeing was supplying. The competition with Airbus was very strong. And so during the time that Boeing was competing for this, it also engaged with the principal deputy undersecretary of the Air Force for acquisition. And she and Boeing discussed the bids, the process, and her career after she retired, all the time this procurement was going on. And it turned out that, in fact, they got caught. And what happened, I think, is certainly a lesson for them. The woman who was the deputy undersecretary was sentenced to 9 months in jail, fined at $5,000, and given 3 years of supervised release. The Boeing CFO, who was the primary contact with the woman, was fired and served 4 months in prison. Boeing CEO was forced to resign, and Boeing paid a $615 million fine. That's just a sort of a big scale example of what can happen when you're not dealing straight from a procurement integrity point of view. And again, this is a problem that is faced fairly frequently. You've got a good company, you're doing good work, a government official is about to retire and wants to talk about working for your company. Seems kind of like, well, they're going to retire in a couple of months or a couple of weeks or a year. We should be talking to them, but that's a non-starter. Right? That's just flat wrong. And the sensitivity sometimes isn't there to realize that in and of itself can be a violation of procurement integrity. Another example, and much closer to home, we had a team working on a rail project at one of the metro rails for one of the major cities in the US. And we put together a good team. We believed that we were in the preferred position to win the work. We submitted our proposal and all the accompanying documents. And a couple days later, one of our subcontractor partners showed up at our offices and announced that he had in this box in front of him all of our competitors' proposals. Now, to their credit, our team did the right thing. They kept the lid on the box. They immediately called and said, we have this box of stuff, what should we do? And we decided what we would do is tell the procurement agency that we had it and offer to withdraw from the competition. Hoping, of course, that because we didn't look at it and because we gave it back, we wouldn't have to withdraw from the competition. But unfortunately, discretion being the better part of valor, the customer decided that we had to withdraw. So a job we should have won, probably would have won, went away from us because somebody violated the procurement integrity because they thought it'd be good if we had those proposals. It can get you in big trouble. And I'm very proud of our team for doing the right thing. Obviously, I'm disappointed that we didn't get a chance to execute the work. There's also conflicts of interest that can affect you. Not too long ago in my career, we had an operation in a remote part of Alaska. And we got a call on our ethics hotline. It said that the project manager was procuring office supplies from her husband's business. And so we investigated, and sure enough, turned out to be true. But it also turned out that her husband was the only supplier of office supplies in that part of Alaska, and that the basis on which we'd done business was fair and equitable. So the problem there wasn't as much. It was certainly a problem, but the key problem was the failure to disclose. You know, had there been a key disclosure there of, hey, my husband's the only one who has this stuff that we need, we could have arranged for somebody else other than the wife to do the procurement and kept everything on the up and up. So another area that I think you'll find you run into with some degree of frequency is the potential for a conflict of interest. And disclosure is the answer to that question. You just need to be sure you tell people that there's a conflict, and then we can figure out, they and you can figure out what to do. So then there's project ethics, right? I think everybody has probably been pretty familiar with project ethics. You know, you talk about it a lot in ethics classes in the engineering schools. You talk about engineers' professional duties. You talk about the relationships of time, cost, and quality, and the balancing act that has to be done, and your engineering judgment. But and most of the time, you're going to make a good decision, and you're going to make the right decision. But it really is your individual responsibility, as well as the collective responsibility of the team, to be sure that the proper ethical decisions are being made. For those of you who don't remember, or perhaps aren't old enough to remember, that is the explosion that happened when the solid rocket booster on the shuttle exploded. I happen to have a friend who was in the room when the decision was made to go ahead and launch the shuttle. And it was, to hear him tell it at least, a fascinating issue. The scientists and engineers in the room were not comfortable that we should launch. And they were arguing that we shouldn't launch, but they couldn't prove why we shouldn't launch. And there was tremendous political pressure to launch, to which the scientists couldn't, apparently, say, well, with certainty that there would be a problem if we did launch. And as you know, the decision was made to launch, and the result is what you see. It's interesting to me to think about what I would have done had I been either a very junior engineer, as my friend was, or one of the senior people involved in the decision-making process, and how I might have acted. I've never been in a situation quite like this one, so I don't know the answer. But I think it's something worth thinking about, because as engineers and professionals, a lot of us are going to be faced with a judgment that could, in fact, result in significant loss of life or damage or both. And it's our ethical duty to really have thought through how to do the right thing. And the time to think about it's before you're faced with the issue, not on the moment. There's also the issue of my last issue, if you recall, also lying, cheating, and stealing. This is Martha Stewart going to jail for lying. Not a good thing to do. Generally, the Justice Department will find a way to punish you. I know of instances where engineers have lied to justice, and the result has been that they have lost their licenses to practice engineering or architecture, whatever they happen to have, and become felons in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of all the future they have is now colored by that decision to do something that, in the particular case I know about, what the action that had taken place wasn't even illegal. It may not have been right, but it wasn't illegal, and there was absolutely no reason to lie about it. But lie they did, and the consequences were as bad for them as, well, probably worse for them than for Martha, because Martha's still got a lot of money. And then here's an interesting piece of information. This is a set of behaviors that various generations have said were acceptable or not acceptable. And I'm struck by the fact that statistically the millennials are, and some of the Gen Xers are significantly different than boomers and traditionalists. And that there's a significant number of people who believe it's acceptable to do some of these things that you see here, even though I don't think it's acceptable. Now that doesn't make me right. You have to make a judgment for yourself. I'd be interested for you to think about what you believe about these 6 items and whether you think it's acceptable or not. But again, it's something you need to think about as you go forward, if you're going to really reflect what you'd like to from a career point of view. Why does it all happen? Well, a lot of people say that there's a lot of pressure out there to compromise ethics. This is interesting data from the Ethics Council. And what I find particularly interesting about it is the global median for people who feel pressured is about 1 in 5, 22%. But in North America for the purpose of this slide is the US and Mexico, is significantly higher than that. Europe is higher. And Africa, surprisingly to me, is lower. So, you really have to ask yourself, where does this pressure come from? Now, obviously, it could be put on people because it's personal, that they're driven by greed or power or fear or some kind of set of expectations. It's convenient. They're just conforming. It could be that the culture of the top is bad. You can think about the Enron debacle of a few years ago and think, there's an example of a bad culture at the top. There's the possibility that it's just conformity, right? A survey was done not too long ago. I'm going to say this was about 5 years ago. And when they surveyed this group, about 90% of the people they surveyed believed they had seen misconduct. And when they went to the question of why it wasn't reported, of the ones that observed misconduct, roughly only 2/3 actually reported it. And again, you have to ask yourself, why? I mean, what is it that drives people not to report misconduct when they see it? And again, it could be a bad culture, it could be personal reasons, it could be desire not to stand out. But those things are real challenges for companies and for generations. Conformity in particular is a huge risk, right? There are a lot of companies. Jacobs was what I would characterize as a networked company. There are generations that are more networked generations. And in my experience, the risk of conformity pressures is higher in those kinds of organizations than it might be in others. But there's clearly things that can be done, right? I mean, first off, you need to think about an ethical dilemma, the dilemmas you're going to face before you face them if you can, right? You need to rely on coworkers and management for support. And you need to be supportive of your coworkers in return. And when you see something that's uncertain, get advice. The easiest thing in the world, going back to my example of the conflict of interest issue between the husband and wife team, was just simple, right? Just talk to somebody about it, get advice. If it's culture, simple thing to do is don't work there. Companies with bad cultures are bad places to work, and the best thing you can do is go work somewhere else. And if you observe misconduct, blow the whistle. You find out quickly whether the company really wants to eliminate misconduct or doesn't. If you disclose misconduct, if you disclose conflicts of interest, if you disclose issues with procurement integrity, it makes a lot of problems go away. My way of thinking about it is to have a personal code of conduct, right? Companies have them. Why shouldn't people? I've thought about what it meant to me when I was running Jacobs, what it means to me today, to maintain my ethical standards. And I think that the thing that probably drives me most, and my wife would tell you the same thing, is that I just tell myself I'm not like that. That's not who I am. We tell ourselves, my wife and I, that we're not like that. That's not who we are. And when we see, and that lets us stick to our personal code, no matter what we see other people doing, because there is that strong tendency out there to assume if everybody does it, it must be okay. And you really got to resist that conformity. So a long-winded sort of discussion of integrity, but one I think that in ethics, but one I think that's really important when you come to safety. Because to me, safety is an ethical issue. The hard hat you see in that picture had a head in it, and that young man fell 10 feet, a little over 3 meters, to his death, and left his wife and 2 children. He wasn't tied off, and should have been. He wasn't my employee, but that doesn't make it okay. It was a project where we were involved. And it really is, to me at least, unacceptable to see these kinds of things happen. And I'll give you a bunch of statistics about that here in a minute. But it's another way to look at it is the way I came to look at it when I was at Jacobs. We were getting a better safety record every year. And as you'll see, that's true of the country at large. But our safety record wasn't improving as fast as we were growing. And what that meant to me was that every year we would injure more people. And that just wasn't acceptable to me. And so we went about thinking of how that might be changed. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about that and your role in seeing to the safety of your friends and family and coworkers going forward. Right? It's the case that for safety, an awful lot of what's involved is an honor system. It's choices you make when no one's looking or when it's inconvenient that determine whether or not you or your loved ones will be safe. For example, in the sense of something is inconvenient, there was a study done of cell phone usage in the UK a few years ago, and they had 4 groups of drivers. So the first group was their control group. They were just normal people and driving in a closed course, being subjected to various kinds of tests and reaction times and the like. Second group was legally drunk. So they got them all liquored up and they were over the legal limit. I think it was 0.08 blood alcohol, same here in California. The third group were given hands-free cell phones. And the fourth group were given handheld cell phones. And in the latter two cases, they were engaged in a conversation. And so they put them through this closed course and put various obstacles and challenges in front of them. And who do you guess was the worst performing group? Well, I know you can't answer me, but it was the hands-held cell phones. Who were the two groups that tied for next worst? The drunks and the hands-free cell phones. Tied. And this study has been duplicated a few other times. And, you know, driving while talking on your cell phone can affect your perception and judgment as bad as driving under the influence. We took that at Jacobs to mean we just had to stop allowing the use of cell phones while in vehicles, and we did. And there was a lot of complaining about it because some of our folks drove quite a long ways to get to job sites or to get to work, and they wanted to be able to use their phones. But we stuck to our guns, and people stopped using their cell phones, and our vehicle incident rate improved. But, you know, texting obviously is just as bad. Here's how bad it can be. The story that I've been told related to this is that the two people who were in the red car were texting and pulled out of in front of the guy on the motorcycle who was unable to stop. And they all died. All because somebody thought it was urgent to get a text in. So here's the industry statistics. I told you I would get to that in a minute. Last year, for which we have data, 2018, the 2019 data won't come out until the middle of November. There were 2.8 million injuries in private industry. 900,000 cases where people were away from work. 5,200 workers died on the job. That's on average more than 100 a week. That's 14 deaths a day, 7 days a week. And if you think about it, that pretty much means that sometime today, in all likelihood, during our call, someone will be killed. Out of the 4,779 that were in private industry, over 1,000, 21+%, were in construction. 1 of 5 worker deaths last year were in construction. That's an astounding number, and sadly, it's been about that high for years now. Part of the reason that the KU has the National Center for Construction Safety is to try to address this very problem of how we can stop killing and injuring people. Of those 900 days away cases, that's where people had to miss work. About 37% required going to a medical facility. Most of those just meant they went to the emergency room and then went home. But just shy of 40,000 cases required hospitalization. And the median number of days that those people were hospitalized was 41. So in addition to the fatalities, right, in 2018, we had 1.6 million days of hospitalization as a result of injuries in industry. I think that's pretty terrible. So how are we doing? Well, here's the story. This is the incident rate of total recordable cases. It's another measure of injuries. In this case, it's a measure of how many injuries per 100 worker years, right? 200,000 hours occur. As you can see, we've drifted down from just over about 3.6 to about 2.8 over a decade. That's just not significant improvement at all. I mean, it may be statistically significant, but in terms of the avoidance of injury and death, we're just not making the progress that we need to make. So let me tell you a little story. I'm going to do this one first, and then I'll talk about a couple of others. But when I learned to drive, which was back in about 67, the driver's ed classes all said that you should follow the car behind you, leaving 3 seconds between you. So, the 3-second rule was that if you could count from the time that the car in front of you crossed a marking or a point to the time you crossed it, if it was 3 seconds, you were safely behind. I took a refresher driver safety course, and the company required of all of us about, let's say 6 or 7 years ago now. And that 3-second rule had become 2 seconds. And that troubled me a little bit. Why would we reduce the safe driving distance? Well, I went and looked, and sure enough, I picked a Corvette, 67 Corvette. Took 135 feet for a Corvette to stop from going 60 down to 0. A 2015 Corvette only took 90 feet. So about 2/3 of 1967 numbers. Interesting enough, about 2/3 of 3 seconds or 2 seconds. So what did we do in driver's ed? Instead of allowing an additional margin of safety because we have better braking systems, ABS and all the like, we simply reduced the safe following distance and thereby eliminated any benefit. Not sure why we did that, right? I have a relatively new Mercedes, which has one of these distronic systems in it that keeps you a safe distance, according to the vehicle, from the car in front of you. And as far as I can tell, that's about 1.4 seconds. So my new safer Mercedes now allows me to follow even closer. And I'm very aware of the frustration that even when I'm following at that distance, people will pull in between me and the car in front of me. It's California after all. But again, we just seem to be eliminating the benefit of technology in terms of safety. And I wonder if it's not that very reliance that's part of what keeps us from doing better safety-wise. I want you to think a little bit about jaywalking, and I'm not going to advocate jaywalking at all, I don't. But if you look at my data happens to be 2013, about 4,700 pedestrians were killed in 2013 in motor vehicle related accidents. More than half of that were in or around crosswalks. So think about that for a minute. If you are, in fact, actually jaywalking, you're probably very aware of what's going around. You're very aware of the traffic. You know you're at risk. You're looking both ways. You're really sure you have an adequate space. Nobody's going to come out and surprise you. And so your risk awareness is high. But if you're at a crosswalk with your cell phone and the little white man shows up on the sign, you start walking. The level of awareness, the level of risk awareness in particular, isn't as high. But why shouldn't it be as high? Right? Why wouldn't it be better if you maintained that same risk awareness and maybe 2,350 pedestrians wouldn't have died? There's a ton of other data like this. I'm not going to share the slides, but when they implemented rear seat belts for children in the UK, this is going to go back to 2000, or even further than that, 98 maybe. The fact of the matter is deaths to children went up. Injuries to children went up. Why would that be? Why would more children get injured after this safety measure was implemented than before? Well, it turns out that, as best anyone can tell, the people involved were now presuming that the children were safer and taking more risk. I just think that's astounding, but it is the case. And there's been a lot of study done on it, and generally what we've found is that safety interventions don't alter people's propensity to take risks. And when innovations frustrate responses, or when innovations facilitate taking higher risks, the people will go back to that higher level of risk, with which they were originally content. You know, in the absence of the kinds of things that cause people to think differently, you're going to continue to get the same kind of result. And if you think about what the industry response to that has been for a long time now, the industry response has been, well, somebody did something, and that's why we had this accident. What I call the incident inquisition. And if the real answer is we just get good people to do the right task the right way every time, we'd never have any accidents. And that systems, processes, regardless of how complex or simple the task is, if we've got good systems and processes, we can guarantee safety. And that, you know, it's all about a good people, good process, good procedure, you get good outcomes. And nothing could be further from what actually happens, right? When we looked at a lot of our accidents at Jacobs, what we learned was that something had changed and we didn't recognize it. In many cases, many things had changed and we hadn't recognized it. And that's really what drove us to create Beyond Zero. The idea was that we were going to change how we feel about safety. You'll notice it's Beyond Zero, a culture of caring, and a minute or two on how we came to that topic, right? We were looking around at lots of companies who said, you know, our objective is zero incidents of injuries. And we thought that wasn't very provocative, right? I mean, 0 is 0, okay. But that really wasn't what we thought would drive thinking. And particularly being a company made up largely of engineers and rules-based kind of orientation, we decided Beyond Zero would sort of start to stretch the way our people thought about these issues. And then we'd really make it clear that going Beyond Zero required that your culture developed to the point where it was clear that you had a culture of caring. I remember right after we came out with this program, I was sitting with a consultant in Grand Central Station, and he made a comment to me that I've never forgotten. He said, you know, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you give people an opportunity or permission. I guess his real word was permission to care. And I thought that was a really pretty profound statement. So that changing how we felt about safety meant we needed a new relationship to failure, right? We couldn't keep doing the blame and shame thing. We had to change the culture to one that learn and improve, to realize there's no one root cause to safety events. If you've read anything about the Texas City explosion or any of the major disasters of the last few years, it turns out there's not just one thing that would have prevented the outcome, right? There is no one root event. People make mistakes, procedures are imperfect. And what we have to do is try to create an environment that cares about those things, that reacts to those things, that works with that sense of what I'll call chronic unease to be sure that people are safe. So what we did about it, and what I would encourage you to think about, is if we decided to think differently about it in terms of trying to implement procedures and processes, sure, but to work much more on the subjective side of the equation. You know, as an engineering company, we love procedures and processes. We could build those all day long, but it's clear that procedures and processes alone won't get you to the answer of a safe, caring culture. What really was required was to change the way people think. And we found good examples. For example, there's a company called Alan Myers up in the Philadelphia area. And they have a program which they call Praise the Day. And so every morning when they get ready to do their day's work, they have a job safety meeting and a toolbox talk, and they talk about the work plan for the day. And almost every company in the industries I've been in does that. What was different about Alan Myers' way was at the end of every day, they had another meeting. And they talked about what went well and what went poorly and what they could have done differently. And they talked a little bit about what tomorrow's work was going to be and gave everybody a chance to think about that a little bit, comment on what potential opportunities for risk and the like were out there. We stole that idea with permission, of course, and implemented it at Jacobs. And it had, in the first project where we implemented that program, it had profound effect, not only on safety, but on productivity. It was all about caring and listening and exchanging and informing and engaging and going all the way back to our leadership principles, communicating, that made a difference in the outcome. Another company, BMW Constructors up in the Indianapolis area, had another program that we stole called the 2-minute drill. And they took theirs from the football sort of thing. And the idea was that every couple minutes, the team would just take a pause and think about whether anything had changed. And if anything might happen that would result in an accident or an injury that hadn't been thought about, that they weren't prepared for, or that could create challenges for the team. And if things weren't materially different, back to work. But if they were, then they took time out to figure out what they needed to do. And as I said earlier, we found a lot of accidents occurred because of the conditions as they existed when the work started weren't the conditions that existed when the injury occurred. Terrific idea. You've also got to train differently. Got to have a company who has a culture and belief system that wants, cares, and insists on really, really working together to achieve these goals 24/7. A lot of companies in our industry had the idea that they wanted their employees to go home as safe as they, in the same condition or as safe as they were when they came to work. But that really isn't the whole person, is it? And so we didn't adopt a work-only kind of attitude toward Beyond Zero. We extended it, or tried to extend it, I think with some success, to the family, the friends, the 24/7, 365 kind of approach to Beyond Zero and caring. And I think it had some pretty profound positives for us as we began to actually change expectations. One of the ways I was pretty sure we were getting some ground is that I told a story. The story is about one of our men, one of our workers who had left the job site, was driving home. And as he drove by in the subdivision where he lived, saw a guy out on his riding lawnmower with his little girl in his lap, driving around mowing the grass. And our guy drove on a little ways, and then he stopped, turned around, and he went back, got out of the car, walked up to the guy on the lawnmower and said, I appreciate you might not like me being in your face or anything. I'm not trying to be. But have you really thought about the risks to you and your little girl with what you're doing? The guy was wearing flip-flops, by the way. And the guy first got a little stiff about it, but then he stopped and he thought about it. And he said, you're right. And the guy went inside, put on proper shoes, had his little girl stay in the house, and went back out and finished mowing the lawn. Now, that took courage for that employee of ours to do that. And it may or may not have had any impact. That little girl might not have gotten hurt. We'll never know. But what we know for sure is she didn't get hurt, at least not that day. because that employee cared about a complete stranger. That was to me, was a really powerful story. And the power of stories was such that I told that story to everyone. I still tell that story. I just told it again. And that's, to me, that I told you earlier that I think, storytelling is a powerful way to communicate when you're in a leadership role. It just flat is a powerful way to communicate. And you can change expectations by doing that. So, that's kind of where I'm going to put us on the topic of beyond zero and safety. Each one of us has the opportunity to show the courage to care and to show it openly and make a difference. And I believe that people who do will make the best leaders and will often find themselves with great career paths and tremendous opportunity and really be proud to look yourself in the mirror. I do have a couple of other things I just wanted to throw in. Since this is a career accelerator series, there were a couple of other comments I thought I'd make before I turned it over to questions. The picture you see there, by the way, is just exactly the example of the kind of things that you don't want to see. I mean, this is actually near KU, and it's what that guy's doing, to my way of thinking, is scary. And the challenge for me would be, what would I do about it if I walked by right now? And, I think I'd have to go say something. So anyway, back to my other 2 points. A lot of people are very career minded. They want to know how to get ahead. Sometimes people ask me how I got to be CEO of Jacobs. And the real answer to that question is in a lot of things, and not just 2 things, but these certainly 2 things contribute. Throughout my career, I was fortunate to be given some opportunities to go do something that scared me. So instead of going from, project manager to senior project manager to super senior project manager to manager of project manager to manager of managers and project managers and so on, what I would call the career path, my career went all over the place. I worked on construction management, I led engineering businesses, I did privatizations, I worked in independent power, and even in the last major job I had before I became the CEO of Jacobs was when I was asked to take over sales, and I'd never been in sales in my life. And I was scared to death. But the fact of the matter is, every one of those things that were scary were opportunities for my personal growth and my skill building. And they weren't opportunities I'd have gotten had I stayed on that career path that everybody had outlined for me. And I would encourage you to hold your hand up as you go through your career for the things that scare you, for the opportunities that are not what you're used to doing, because I think it'll have a very positive impact on your career. The other issue that I think is really powerful, I learned this in a program called Investment in Excellence, maybe 1992, 91. Was the first time I at least had heard it put this way. I've read some stuff about it before that, but there's a big difference between choose to and have to. And it is amazing how much the difference in how you look at a task or whatever it is that needs to be accomplished, whether you choose to accomplish it or think you have to accomplish it. Every job has routine and the mundane in it, the boring, or whatever you want to call it, the paper pushing, whatever doesn't appeal to you. And you can look at those things as things that you have to do. But wow, it's grinding. If you look at them instead on the basis of something you choose to do, then you're way better off, because everything you do is a choice. There isn't actually anything you have to do, except maybe die. But the difference is dramatic, and probably the way to I've been able to explain it best to people. I don't know maybe how many of you have experienced this, but I certainly have. That last day or two before you're going to go on a vacation or a holiday, and you're excited to get everything done so you can get out of there and get going with your holiday and not have anything, lagging or, kind of dragging on you. And so you're so productive. And, you realize that if you were that productive all the time, you'd be a barn burner. You wouldn't have anything to do. You'd be so productive. And that really reflects what it means to make a choice to do something, as opposed to feeling like you're forced to do it. And I would really encourage you, whenever you're working on any task, to think of it as a choice you've made, something you're getting to because you choose to get to it. You're getting it done because you choose to get it done, and then you'll be able to make new choices. It's a very powerful paradigm if you can use it. Not always easy, but one that I really recommend. So that's all my prepared remarks, or maybe not so prepared remarks. You can decide for me. But I do like this little quote from Galbraith. If they're opposed to changing your mind or proving there's no need, everybody gets busy on the proof. With that, Robert, I'll go back to you, and we can take any questions that might have occurred.
There. Unmute myself. Thanks, Craig. That was great. We did have some questions come in. We've got a good group of questions. I've got some here to share as well. And to start with, I'd like to one thing. If you have to leave, I know people have places to go and appointments and stuff. This is being recorded, and so you're invited to listen to the rest of it at your convenience, and also to share this with your friends and those that your coworkers. Great series, great presentation today. It's also available on YouTube at the School of Engineering YouTube site. All right, first I'll just start with a comment. We had a comment come in from someone saying they really like the praise of the day idea, especially around safety that's difficult to spotlight, as opposed to waiting for the dramatic story before expressing the need for safety adjustments. So I wanted to share that. That is a good idea.
It is, it's powerful.
Okay. Why do you think the general public alters their behavior to counter implemented safety innovations? For example, letting automated vehicles drive while the user reads emails or sleeps.
Wow. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. I think there is a tendency for some people at least, to rely on things like automation, vehicle safety automation in particular, as a way to relieve them of multitasking. And so instead of having to try to do two things at once, they get to do one thing. I don't know how you get to sleeping particularly. That's a bit of a stretch for me, but I'm still the kind of guy who puts his car in the autonomous driving mode and then keeps his hands on the wheel and his foot over the brake. And it's not that I don't trust the car. It does what it's supposed to do. It's never failed me. I just don't think that everything that's possible can be anticipated by the current state of technology, or maybe ever. And so I'm one of those that tends to want to be a little conservative about it all. It's a complex problem, and I'm not sure I have a really good answer for why collectively people tend to do that. I think individually it's a matter of comfort with technology and the desire to, quote, multitask.
Okay, this question came in a little earlier, is the disaster related to Qantas, the airline, at the very beginning, comparable to the Challenger disaster in terms of supervisors and leadership choosing to ignore safety concerns? So would you consider those to be comparable, or are they in a different category?
I think they're a little bit of a different category. I think in the case of Challenger, the issue was surfaced at the highest level, and that the leadership both technical and in political, was very aware of what was happening. I think in the Rolls-Royce situation, I think that wasn't true to the same degree. And I think the pattern of ignoring these kinds of issues that it was established in Rolls-Royce was one that, in my way, I would indict Rolls-Royce more than I would NASA for under similar circumstance, because I don't think those two circumstances are quite the same.
Okay. Should you avoid work in countries low on the corruption index?
I would certainly avoid working in countries way low on the corruption index. I think those places are generally, with those levels of corruption, there's also high levels of crime and all kinds of things. I certainly would be uncomfortable working there. And as Jacobs and our CEO, we didn't have people working in those countries. There was sort of a whole list of countries where we just didn't operate because we didn't feel like we could keep our people safe. Where I would draw the line, I'd have to do some more research. It's been a long time since I looked at the data in real depth, because I don't have any employees anymore, except me. But I think, yeah, there are places in the world you shouldn't send your people, or you shouldn't go.
All right. 3 questions on students and new graduates. So first, what's your advice for students to learn leadership skills?
Lead. I know that sounds facetious, but there are in my experience at least, there are all kinds of opportunities, while you're in school or as you're graduating, to lead teams. Study groups are a great example where you've got a bunch of people, a like-minded view, want to do well on their tests. There's already a certain amount of esprit de corps because they've decided to work together, and you can learn significant leadership skills just from something as simple as that, as helping to make sure everybody in the study group is drawn out. Everybody, you do your part of the job, not to show you're the leader, but to help make sure everybody gets a chance to contribute, to learn, and to grow. And all of a sudden, you'll find yourself de facto the leader. So there are things like that. Small projects. If you don't have small projects, if you're working for a company and they aren't ready to give you small projects, you can always find them in charity events, or and again, opportunities to just learn from people, learn how people react, learn how to make sure their voice is heard, learn how to communicate with them, and you'll build your leadership skills.
Very good. You're in the job search. Is there a way to know if a company has an unethical culture before you take a job with them?
I don't know that there's a way to know for certain, but I think there's a certain amount of homework and research you can do that would give you a sense. You can look on the web, you can look at their reputation, their litigation. You can go to the various websites. You're going to have to take some of these websites with a grain of salt, but you can get an idea of how companies are viewed. You can look at reputation surveys and what the business magazines have to say if it's a bigger company. If you could get a chance to talk to the people who work there, find out what they think. If the company has a string of problems with sexual harassment and racism and bribery and corruption, there's probably better places to work. But you can't be certain. And of course, a lot of people are going to work for small companies. And then it comes down to, when you're eyeball to eyeball with the person who runs a small company, do you trust them?
Okay. What do you do if you're a new entry-level engineer and you encounter unethical behavior in your company?
Report it. Almost every company these days, certainly every public company, has some kind of a hotline that you can call and report wrongdoing either anonymously or by name if you choose to. And most companies, at least the ones that I've had experience with, take those calls very seriously and actually carefully investigate them and determine whether or not there's a problem. At Jacobs, we got about, I don't remember now, a few dozen calls a month. Most of those turned out to be unsubstantiated. Somebody didn't really understand the situation or what was going on, and it was, all right and proper. But some of those weren't right and proper, and we took immediate action to correct it.
Is it ever appropriate to take ethical concerns to the media?
Well, my view of that would, having sat at the top of a company and would not be very happy if that was the answer. But the fact of the matter is, it depends on whether the company is responding to your concerns. So if you call the hotline and gotten no reaction, nobody's doing anything. If you've talked to HR or legal in the organization and nobody's doing anything, if you're being retaliated against, and that does happen, then it might be appropriate to go to the media. But I would never go there first. I'd always give the company's mechanisms a double chance to work properly before I took it outside the company. And then it would depend whether you go to the media or to government, would depend a little bit on the nature of the ethical issue.
Okay. Is mindset more important than procedures and equipment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can have all the tools in the world out there, but it's the mindset that gets people to use them correctly and not use them when they shouldn't. It's policies and procedures are terrific, but it isn't necessarily the case that those policies and procedures can properly reflect the circumstance. And so, top of mind, being aware, being risk aware, and having that mindset will keep you safer than all the best policies and procedures in the world. I know, for example, from personal experience, when BP had the Texas City explosion, they had lots of policies and procedures, but they weren't followed.
Okay, many of your examples have focused on hardware like the Qantas engine issue and construction type failures and ethical issues. What about fields like computer science? Is there an ethical safety concern there?
Well, you're outside my expertise a little bit, but I have to believe there is. I have to believe that, I worked for a little while when I was in college as a programmer working on a medical diagnostic software. And, the idea was to find quick and elegant diagnosis given certain, test conditions or whatever of the subject, and help the doctor get more quickly to resolution. It was a tough problem. We were making very slow progress. We're talking about 1966 Fortran kind of days. But it's entirely possible that under the right circumstances, there could be ethical considerations in how that software gets constructed, or what potential issues the person doing the coding is asked to address or not address. There's also the uses that code can be put to. So I think there are a number of things in the computer science field. I suspect, I shouldn't say I know, I suspect there are a number of things in the computer science field that would have ethical considerations. And there's still the way you run the business, the way you treat the people doing the work, what kinds of facilities. We did a lot of work for some of the big companies in data centers. And data centers turn out to be kind of dangerous places. There's lots of ways to get hurt. And so the consideration for the employees that work in those data centers, that could be an ethical issue as well.
Okay. Um, how safe does an engineering design need to be safe?
Oh, I don't know that I can answer that question. It's a great question, but I think you have to. There are a lot of variables missing to get at the answer to that question, and even then, I think it's going to be an ethical judgment about how safe it has to be. Um, the kinds of questions I'd ask are what are the consequences of failure, right? Um, what are the value? What's the value of success? Because the consequences of failure are great. It's going to have to be awfully safe, right? If the consequences of failure are very, very low, then you probably have more tolerance.
Okay. And finally, last question. How do you approach work in an international setting where the culture tolerates higher levels of corruption and safety risk than are acceptable in the United States?
Well, I am increasingly it doesn't matter what the culture, the local culture has as a view of what level of corruption is appropriate. You know, the law, and probably more so the UK Bribery Act, even than the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, is sort of crystal clear on what you can and can't do. And when you can and can't do that, you can or can't do that. And you just have to ignore the local preferences for more corruption or whatever it happens to be. Preference is hardly the right word, but because you can't do it. And moreover, it's wrong, right? I mean, any level of corruption is not appropriate and just because it's culturally acceptable doesn't make it a good thing. What we did find as we went around the world and grew is that a number of cultures where my belief was that corruption was going to be a problem turned out not to be a problem once we made it absolutely clear that we weren't going to do that. So, you take countries like some of the India, Pakistan, you can take China, where there is some expectation of a certain level of corruption. And we just said, look, no, we're not doing that. Don't do it. Don't even think about it. And we didn't. And we actually had people, reporting when people tried to solicit bribes from us. So we'd get almost instant reporting in India, for example. So I think there are risks and there are places where you just don't want to work because you can't work without the bribery and corruption. So you just choose not to go there.
Okay, well, that was great. Thank you, Craig. Thank you for presenting. If we could applaud, we'd all applaud now. But anyway, we appreciate you taking your time and sharing your experiences with us. To everybody out there, I would encourage you to share this experience, share the word of these lectures with those you know. They are available on YouTube. They're also available I think you can still reverse register for this, and there are 2 more to come. One will be in 2 weeks and one will be in 4 weeks. So we'd encourage you to return for those as well. And with that, thank you again, Craig. Thanks everybody for attending. This concludes the 4th installment of our Career Accelerator lecture series. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.